Hey, it's Brother Michael Arce from the Craftsman Online Podcast. No commercials this week, except for just one ask. I'm going to slip you a bonus episode here with Brother Chris Wessell. This is a extra benefit of being one of our Patreon member subscribers. $5 a month, you get an ad-free listening experience, you get early access to our episodes, and you get bonus content like this, some of the extra time we have with select guests, where they really get into the grist of some of the conversation that we weren't able to get on the original version of the podcast. For example, in this episode, earlier this week, you heard Brother Chris talk about the special onboarding process that Masters Lodge number 5 in Albany, New York has developed as part of their culture to bring in interested gentlemen in Freemasonry who actually become active members of the lodge. Well, for our subscribers, they've already heard this, but he's going to present to you 3 points that every lodge can follow. We call them Wessell's rules on how to improve their membership experience when it comes to bringing new guys in the door. Again, you get this for free. I just wanted to share this with you for the benefit of the craft so everybody got a chance to hear it. But if you dig it, I'm telling you what, you're going to get some extra access to some of our favorite guests, like Brother Angel Millar, who's going to be coming up in a week or so on the podcast. We're going to have a special bonus episode with him. You get extra content from Brother Matthew Brockbank when he talks about the historical lectures, some of the ins and outs of his favorite parts. And if you enjoyed our episode on the Batman in Comics of the Crafts with worshipful Brother Wes Latchford from September, he talks about the unique way on how Batman and the Freemasons quote unquote, lay down their working tools, so to speak, especially when it comes to that epic final scene of the new Flash movie. You can start your 7-day free trial to the Craftsman Online Patreon membership by clicking on the link of this episode, and I hope you consider becoming a member as well. Just know that all the generous support that we get through Patreon goes towards the production of the Craftsman Online podcast so we can keep sharing the light. Enjoy.
The comments, opinions, and views shared during this program are of those individual Freemasons and do not reflect the official position of a Grand Lodge, concordant body, appendant body, Masonic Authority, or craftsmanonline.com. Welcome to the Craftsman Online Podcast, the only 5-star rated Masonic podcast endorsed by the Grand Lodge of New York.
Hello, it's Brother Michael Arce, co-founder of CraftsmanOnline.com. I'm excited because we get some extra time with Brother Chris Wessell from Masters Lodge number 5 in Albany, New York. And it's one of the things I've mentioned to friends, to fellow Masons, and they say, give me an example of a successful lodge when it comes to membership, engagement, retention. I point to 2, Chris. I say there's Masters number 5 in Albany, New York, and Denver number 5 in Denver, Colorado. No relation, just share that same number. But between them, they've both developed their own process of what we call guarding the West Gate. And that was the title of the episode that you joined us on earlier this week. And I'm just curious what your first impression of that phrase, guarding the West Gate, meant when you first became a Mason to where you are now as basically as the membership mentor for your lodge.
I got the concept of it when it first arose. As someone who's been in recruiting for about 20 years, I can tell you there is internal language and external language. And a lot of times organizations will share internal language externally, and it can, the language you use within the organization to describe certain processes is maybe not the best way to phrase it to attract someone to come in. So I think the term guarding the West Gate is great for Masons to understand, because we get like, okay, this is, you're making sure that, only the best people come in, like that kind of thing. I think for it to be a candidate facing term, it might be a little negative in how it's perceived, because it's almost like we're trying to, do you know what I mean? Like it almost like a little adversarial. It's not horrible. It's just, I don't use that term a lot when I'm talking to candidates, because I just think that it maybe gives the wrong connotation. I think it makes complete sense internal to the organization because we get like what it's trying to say.
Your background is in talent optimization. And that's one of the things that I found really interesting. I'm like, oh, we're going to have Brother Wessell on. He's the principal consultant, as we mentioned, and co-founder of PeopleWise, which is a talent optimization firm in Albany, New York. So your professional role is literally finding the right person for the right job for the best outcomes. I think you've shared enough just in sprinkling your wisdom throughout this podcast, but are there additional things that really a lodge or just maybe Freemasonry in whole could benefit from if they looked at the onboarding, or we can't use the word recruiting because we don't really do that, but the joining process through the eyes of a professional?
At the end of the day, it's organizations and it's people, right? So it's still it's very applicable, right? The same principles apply of where if you're hiring for a company or considering going to work for one, it's a very similar experience on either side of joining a lodge. And I've of course broken record on the consistency stuff, but like that aside, the candidate experience and putting yourself in their shoes is super important. And as unfortunately, and I'm victim to this as much as anybody else, but us Masons, we all love our little terminology, our inside lingo, our stuff that we say. And this is the same in any business too. I have to have these conversations with CEOs where, they're, they'll put together a job description and like there's some internal terminology or acronyms, and I'm like, nobody's going to know what that means. We need to break this down to like common language, right? And so I think that when you're communicating with potential members, whether it's the initial contact or the ongoing communications with them, or the kind of setting the stage for like closing the process, I think that you need to consistently put yourself in their shoes and think about whether or not they know what you're talking about, right? So right from the beginning, like we're this organization, it's got all sorts of terms and symbols and stuff, like, and they're not going to learn any of that. But like, if you break it down, like, hey, we have these dinners and here's the dress code and here's what we're gonna have to eat and this is what you can expect. Or, and again, like sometimes like I've seen people just forward on communications that are meant for brothers and have language in them that only like a brother would like, he's like, you can't reference things like cable toe and things like they're not going to know what that means. Fundamentally, like when we explain to them in the recruiting process that like, Masonry doesn't expect anything of you that like you're not able to give of yourself because you have other, obligations that come first, okay, I could say cable toe, they have no idea what I'm talking about, or I could say that. And then they're like, okay, yeah, that makes sense to me. So I think as you're communicating with them, always think about like, am I using like common language? So that, and then again, or companies do that all the time. Look at job descriptions, scroll through postings, and you're going to always see some term that you're like, not really sure what that is.
So lose the jargon. That's a good rule. Wessell's rule 1, lose the jargon.
Yeah, lose the jargon. And I think that you have to give them a good onboarding too. Like it doesn't end with they sign the petition and they know what nights the degrees are, right? Well, for starters, by the way,
right,
get your hands on, if the Trestle board is not already published yet, and talk to the incoming master, get a copy of theirs. Don't spread it around. But like one of the things I wanted to make sure I found out way before it was published was like, what are the degree nights? Because I just need to let these guys know this summer who are thinking about joining the fall. He officially released it like the other day, but like, I need to know that information sooner. So there needs to be a lot of internal communication with leadership, and to make sure that like, as they're planning their year, there is an understanding of where we're going to like weave candidates into that, so that I can then go to these client candidates and say, hey, listen, I know you're not going to make every single second Monday and Tuesday, or second and fourth Monday, but these ones you're not going to want to miss. And these ones, try to keep your morning light the next morning if you can, because they're going to run late, so
lose the jargon, sync the calendar.
It's very, 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 very important that the sponsors stay involved throughout. And that also means, and I'm saying like swinging through the ball. So like once they're in, like that sponsor, like don't, just be careful not to rely too much on like the candidate selection team to like continue to guide them. Like it's all of our job, but it's like, hey, you brought this person in, you really have to take responsibility for kind of showing them around. And yes, lots of people have said, and I even saw something in the Facebook group like this morning about like, you got to be seeking things out. It can't be all spoon fed to you or whatever. And I agree with that to an extent, but you got to start somewhere. You got to let them know where the bathrooms are. Like, you know what I mean? So,
right.
So I think like the involvement of sponsorship throughout will also make a huge difference. Because they came around because their friend said, hey, come to this. Like, if their friend's not still talking to them about it, they got to be like, what is, why am I here?
Right. Right. Yeah. So lose the jargon, sync the calendar, stay connected. I don't know if this is one of your points, but I was just curious, like, as someone who went through a job search, and there's also the appearance that you don't want to seem desperate in a situation. And that works on the job seeker side, but also on the employer side, where like, oh yeah, we've had so many people apply. You're just one of many. Or, wow, we've had nobody apply for this job. It's a surprise that you showed any interest at all. Like, imagine going to a lodge where they're like, we haven't had a new member in 5 years. Like, well, why do I want to join this lodge?
I had a conversation when we had lunch with a candidate to sign his petition a couple of weeks ago. Dan and I were sitting down with him, and he had asked a very fair question of like, how many other guys am I going to do this with? And I said, well, we're still, ironing that out. We try to keep it at 5 or 6 max, just so that, to make sure that everyone gets the full experience and it's not diluted. But I was like, at the moment, I'm like, it might just be a couple. And the reason for that is that, we have a lot, as he met a lot of people who would come to events who weren't brothers and stuff. I'm like, everybody's at a different place, and everybody's, some people are ready, some people are not, and that's the beauty of masonry, is like, we've been here for a long time. We're still going to be here for a long time. Yes. Do we need to recruit on an ongoing basis? Sure. To survive or whatever. But at the end of the day, if somebody who's casually interested, if you like lean on them to join, like, that's not going to go well. You're not going to lose anything. Your lodge isn't going to collapse if the guy decides next fall is the best time for him. And you have to support that and embrace it and say, hey, cool, I get it. We're still here. You're still welcome to come to all the dinners, all the lunches. Even better, I'll use examples of people who came around for like a year or more before they formally joined. And I'm like, listen, at the end of the day, it makes for a better experience. So you definitely don't want to be pushy, and you don't want to make it seem, you definitely don't want to posture like, well, we have so many people to choose from, and you're, which companies do that. I hate that shit. But you also don't want to seem like desperate, like, oh my God, like, don't, like, they can kind of smell the desperation. The same thing with companies that hire, where they're like these guys are a little too eager to get me on board. Like, what is going on here?
This has been a subscriber extra episode of the Craftsman Online podcast. Again, I want to thank our guest, Brother Chris Wessell from Masters Lodge number 5, for sharing some bonus time with us. If you've enjoyed this episode, it means a lot, and it just takes a few seconds. If you share a review, comment, feedback on the Craftsman Online podcast, it doesn't matter what player you're listening on, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, whether you're on your phone, if you got a desktop screen in front of you, just click on 5-star review, couple kind words, a thumbs up. It all helps us in connecting with men or people who have an interest in Freemasonry, and we thank you in advance. Until next time, let truth and harmony prevail.